It's not very dramatic, Steve, when you are already out here. I was expecting the can down the stairs.
That's for the exit.
Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight. We're going to try and have a fun conversation, not too structured. Part of the difficulty of the task at hand is that Steve asked me to come out and introduce his book with a general wrap-up of its plot and characters and main themes, which is very difficult because on the surface of it, you think that's going to be quite easy. We've been friends for a long time. I loved the book, and I thought, who better to come out and introduce his book? Although, as I put my mind to the task, I thought it's quite a bit more difficult to sum up what's in this extremely intricate, complex, and by turns, I think, funny, sad, and moving book, particularly when it's a book about two friends like us. Based on us, I hope that's the big revelation for tonight. But then it's funny. I started reading reviews because I thought reviewers will say it faster and better than I will. But then I happened upon a fan website, and I wanted just to read one fan review because it's such a good one, and it's only short. It says, "It's so hard to write about what this book is about, but I felt that with a fraction of the whole too. And I imagine that Toltz has a brain that never shuts off. And if you can't keep up, it's your loss. You have to take a breath because the story is a tsunami. It's the story of a bizarre friendship. And like most stories, some of us are the observers, Liam, who might be standing in the splash zone of the entertainment, Aldo. Liam is richer for having Aldo, but also tormented by his love for his friend." And I thought, that's pretty cool if a fan's able to articulate the sort of the vibe of the book so clearly. That's who I'm quoting tonight. So I'd love to invite you, Steve, I think you're going to read
Yes.
a little bit of the book.
Okay, so I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning. That way I don't have to set anything up, because as Anton has described, it's much too complicated to set up. So this is just from the very, very beginning of the book. Down at the foamy shoreline, where small tight waves explode against black rocks, a lifeguard with feet wedged in the wet and vaguely tangerine sand stands shirtless like a magnificent sea Jesus. An ill-timed journey into a breaker knocks a boy on his little back. A bald man throws a tennis ball for his Labrador, and a second unrelated dog bounds in after it. Through a gauze of mist, a brunette, tall and from where we're sitting, seemingly riddled with breasts, kicks water on the sunlit torso of her blonde companion. There are 3 other drinkers in the place, already tethered to the sun-bleached bar. It is 11 a.m. Slumped in his cumbersome mechanised wheelchair that squeaks somewhere down by the left back wheel when he's doing pressure lifts, Aldo squints out from sand-whipped windows into the tumour of searing light. He turns to me and says, "I'm nobody's muse." I think, that's a great line right there. I take out my notebook, and when he shoots me an outraged look, I say, "That's right, motherfucker, I'm writing it down." Aldo wipes the condensation off his beer glass and uses it to moisten his lips. "I know you're tired of being fodder, but for me to finish this book, I confess, I need at the most your blessing, and at the least, unrestricted access to your innermost thoughts and feelings. You know, fantasies secreted inside secret fantasies I already know about, that kind of thing." "Jesus, Liam," I say, "you even take mocking yourself too seriously." "I am serious." We sort of leer mildly at each other in the mirrored bar. "This book," I say, "will help you laugh at yourself again." I still laugh at myself. Not in proportion to how hilarious you are. Come on, Aldo, where'd your sense of humour go? I know where it went, but on only his second morning out of prison, I want to see if he will dare articulate it. He doesn't, only dams a sudden gush of saliva with his sleeve, and when his face reddens in embarrassment, I go rigid myself. "You know," I murmur, "you could sue the state for failing their duty of care." He turns to me abruptly and pretends to startle, our old gag. and explains how justice is either impersonal and indifferent or extremely personal and shamelessly vindictive, and how finding yourself in front of our volatile jury system means submitting your fate to a bunch of people whose omelettes you wouldn't dream of eating for fear they hadn't washed their hands. Aldo sets his mouth tight as I scribble that line and add, he says with the eyes of a croupier doing back-to-back shifts. Down the bar, a man with a long ponytail who looks sunk in his own epic tale of woe gapes at us unapologetically. Aldo says, have you ever had a woman say to you, "Oh, you sad little man"? Not in those exact words. He rotates his chair 180 degrees and shouts, I recommend it to all women as a way to totally annihilate a person. The bartender says, can you two keep it down? I ask, who called you a sad little man? Aldo is chewing something, maybe a part of his own mouth. I ask, was it Mimi? Was it Stella? Was it Saffron? He shakes his head. I ask, was it your physiotherapist? Was it your lawyer? Please tell me it wasn't that ear-candling woman. Aldo's face is that of a child woken by lightning. He says, why should I let you write about me? Because you'll inspire people to count their blessings. His smile, when it arrives, is already vanishing. Hang on, he says, without inflection. And I know what's coming before it's uttered. I've just had an idea, he says, to take to market. Oh? I settle in and listen to the patter of seagulls' webbed feet on the skylight. Two patrons loud slurp and emit full-bodied beer advert ahs. Halfway out Aldo's mouth, soft bubbling sounds that don't mean anything. The look on your face, he says, reminds me of that waiting period between the guilty verdict and the sentencing. Just tell me your idea. You know how we are such optimists, even our Armageddons aren't final? What do you mean? Well, it's post-apocalypse this, post-zombie apocalypse that. People are honestly fretting about what to do after the end times. Right, so you know the slight embarrassment you feel for someone who says they never think about death? Yeah. You know how it's weird that people will trust any old block of ice in their drinks? Yeah. You know how people are worried their kid's going to turn to them and say, what did you do to the biosphere, Daddy? I laugh. True. You know how people used to want to be rock stars, but now they just want rock stars to play at their birthday parties? Uh-huh. You know how we now think pornography is free speech? Like, I don't agree with tentacle sex, but I'll die for your right to produce it? Right. And we always knew people hated their freedom, but now we know they're also contemptuous of privacy. Sure. And you know how there's no replacement cycle too short for today's consumer? Of course. And how now we have the internet, you can't say, you ain't seen nothing yet anymore, since everyone's seen everything by the age of 12. Yep. And people are spooked that good and evil no longer struggle, but just work different shifts. Maybe. His eyes tour the room and return to me renewed. You know how the phrase, at least you have your health, now refers to the state of your organs as commodities you can sell in a pinch? Nobody thinks it means that. And how in our lifetimes we'll see the actual end of patience? His eyes probe my face for signs of impact. Okay, yep. The ideas bloom and flare. Bloom and flare. His fingers drumroll on the bar and end in a finger snap. You know how people divide the world into white privilege and black oppression and never mention Asians or Indians who are like half the planet? Uh-huh. You know how a surprisingly huge number of people like fake leather? Yes. And how people actually believe the obstacle to happiness is they don't love themselves enough? Sure. And how when someone's coping mechanism fails, they just keep using it anyway? Yeah. And how business sapiens are always having power nightmares? They're having what? Bad dreams during power naps. If you say so. Now he looks like a dog who has chewed through his leash and is waiting to pounce. You know how people still believe that happy couples don't have affairs? Uh-huh. And modern relationships are more like, I'll be alone with your thoughts if you'll be alone with mine? Sure. You know how while we're enjoying reading dystopian fiction, for half our population this society is dystopia? Aldo, wait. You know how our fear of turning into our parents has become the fear of inheriting copies of their genetic mutations? Aldo, hold on. You know how nobody who complains about income inequality thinks they personally have too much money? Aldo, just wait. You know how when people talk of first world problems, they forget to mention Alzheimer's and dementia? Can you wait? A mouthful of beer spills onto his shirt. You know how we're still stuck with this prehistoric flight or fight mechanism and now our bodies pointlessly secrete cortisol when we're just running for the bus? And how thanks to online comment boards, more people than ever before knows what it feels like to be reviled? You know how unrequited love has no real-world applications? What's your idea? Disposable toilets. I'll just finish there.
If you want to find out how a disposable toilet works, you will have to buy the book.
Yeah.
Tell us about, well, that's our introduction to one of the main characters, Aldo, who is a frustrated inventor. The big question I have for you is, how do you come up with all these useless inventions?
Useless? Disposable toilets? Useless. Look, Aldo, Aldo is this kind of fearful, but kind of intrepid. He's like an amateur psychologist and a failed businessman, a pathological entrepreneur. And he's the kind of person, in the book he's described as a kind of well-known parasite and failure with multiple bankruptcies who you might find in an alley sharing cigarettes with a masturbating hobo. And I guess, at his ideas that, so he has all these ideas. Some of them, I think, I'm kind of offering to the world, maybe. Like his other ideas are like a BB&B, which is a brothel bed and breakfast. I think that could really take off. Look, there's a ton more. I'm not going to come up with them now. But the book is about fear, and so Aldo has this epiphany when he's kind of in his adolescence that in order to counter anything bad that happens to him or to his loved ones, whether it be something medical or legal, whether he needs to kind of pay for lawyers or doctors or medicine or to buy his way out of trouble, he needs to become rich. And that is the way he's decided to do that, by sort of becoming an entrepreneur and coming up with these kind of get-rich-quick schemes. But they just don't seem to work out exactly right.
It's too bad.
It is too bad.
Now, I wanted to talk a bit about the two friends in the book, about Liam and Aldo, and that Liam, who we've also met just in those opening pages, is setting about writing down or capturing as much of Aldo as he can, what Aldo says, what Aldo does. Can we talk a bit about friendship in the book and where that comes from? You don't have to. It doesn't have to relate back to me. But,
Well, at some point in the book, he makes the observation that I'm not sure what age it is, but there's a certain age in which you reach. I think it'd just be somewhere in your early 20s, I guess, where although you can make a new friend, you can never again make an old friend, and so with the old friends, you're stuck with whoever you have as from childhood, and sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes you don't. I got lucky personally, obviously, but sometimes, like, the book is a lot about friendship, and it talks about friendship, but sometimes when you're writing a book, what is actually a theme or a topic, in this case friendship, is like collateral damage for another theme or topic that I was actually aiming for. So, when I wanted to write this book, being about fear and suffering and all these kind of things, the relationship that I used was friendship. And there's the kind of Walt Whitman quote, which is, I contain multitudes. I feel like I contain sort of 8 to 12 people, and I've written about, like, in this book I've kind of written about 2 of them. My last book I wrote about two of them as well, and so I consider this book and my last book to be like they're kind of like spiritual autobiographies, and so what I've actually done is really just kind of split myself into characters, and before I kind of used the father and son relationship, and this time, I used friendship just because I didn't want to write another parent-child relationship. And I also find, like, dividing yourself into multiple characters, it's like a fun way to dramatize, like, ambivalence about certain things or certain ways of living or certain thoughts. It's also a way to, like, include, and I like kind of reading philosophy and, like, philosophical dialogues. It's a way to include kind of dialogues, but making them inhabit actual people.
Good answer.
Thank you.
I do love this line, by the way, before we move on from friendship, is this observation that the weird truth is I've often become good friends with people I originally disliked, and the more I downright loathe the person, the better friends we eventually became. Which I think is very...
That wasn't the case here.
No. You just mentioned, philosophy, and I think this novel is brimful of philosophical kind of ruminations, and also it's about there's a lot of worldview in the book, from the point of view of these two characters. Within 2 pages we have lines like Liam saying, "I'm sick of looking at you and perceiving a smaller, meaner universe," and Aldo saying, "With medical science improving at roughly the same rate as our environmental situation worsens, the most likely scenario is that the world will become uninhabitable at the precise moment the human race becomes immortal," which I really love. And the novel opens with a quote from Kafka, which is, "Oh, plenty of hope, an infinite amount of hope, but not for us." And I think that's a... Could you talk a bit about sort of philosophy and the worldview of the characters in the book?
Well, there's one's own point of view is like an inexhaustible resource. So, whatever I write, there I am, is the kind of thing. I guess, and I like to write, I guess, humorously, and that also, although that's not really a choice either. That's kind of, I guess that goes somehow back to childhood or something. I think what starts as a defense mechanism becomes a habit, and then it becomes a style, or it becomes, I guess, I think writing humorously came at the same time as I had this kind of relationship to the written word. So that's kind of what comes out, and it doesn't matter what I'm writing about, whether I'm writing about something light and something that would be intrinsically humorous, or something really dark, and that's basically why it sort of comes out like that. And I think, I'm not quite sure why. Philosophy for me is there's a lot of kind of aphorisms, ideas about art, ideas about suffering and death, and they, for me, they come out as little short stories. So whenever even if I read something like metaphysics, or if you read any kind of art theory, any kind of sentence to me is like a little short story. So I feel like ideas are narratives as well, and so it's like it contains, the story itself contains sort of thousands of little short stories.
Nice. It's weird that the book, I think, I found myself laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing, even though there's some really bleak points of view contained within it.
Yeah, I think, I guess there's that kind of difference between, are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? And I used to think, no, I'm a realist, which is kind of the answer to pessimism. And then, then I realized it doesn't really matter which way you go. A lot of the book is also about luck and bad luck, and whether you, by fearing, do you bring on your fears, and is bad luck somehow self-harm by another name? These are kind of things, I think they're based on things that experiences that happened to me, and that I kind of throw into the book.
One of the characters, Morel, the art teacher, says, "If stuck, descend to the floor of the abyss and exhume the idiosyncratic horror that made you." The bleak. But would you tell us a bit about more where that comes from, and the abyss that refers to?
Yeah, so I mean, this book, as you might have noticed in the beginning bit that I read, the character is in a wheelchair. He's a paraplegic, and that's something that actually happened to me. That I was paralyzed for a while. So I was living in Paris, and I was walking down the street one day and had this kind of spontaneous spinal cervical hemorrhage, which left me paralyzed. And so I spent like a month in a hospital in Paris, and then kind of medevaced back to Australia, and spent a number of months in hospital there, learning, basically I was told I wouldn't walk again, or I probably wouldn't walk again, or maybe I wouldn't walk. They didn't really know. And so I, in that experience, which, definitely I used a lot for this book, because it really made me think a lot about, the idea of suffering, and the absurdity of endurance, like how much people can put up with any amount of things, even though when you sort of say it feels unendurable, you actually can endure almost anything. And also there were complicated things of like feeling sorry for myself, and then you look next to the bed next to you and there's somebody who's just like slightly worse off than you, and then you have that complicated thing of having to feel like annoyed because you have to feel grateful for your own suffering. It's like, and so those kind of ideas which we're struggling. And also the other thing which I kind of wanted to include in the book is the idea of the stubbornness of personality. Because we have this kind of myth, I think, in our societies is that, especially that kind of feeling that you can do anything, and certainly in narratives where like you're a certain way, something big happens to you, and then you're changed forever. Whereas my experience of the people that I met in hospital, of myself and the other people, were they, if somebody was very energetic and optimistic before, then they were just energetic and optimistic in their wheelchair. And if they were kind of a crappy, shitty person before, they were crappy and shitty in their wheelchairs. And so the idea that we're just so changed overnight is something that I didn't really find to be all that accurate. And then the absurdity of the situation. So there was there were absurd things that happened, while I was in hospital and while I was in that kind of area. But then afterwards, I kind of wanted to write about all this kind of thing too. Is like I remember, because when I was in hospital, I was only halfway writing A Fraction of the Whole, so I hadn't sold that, and I hadn't made any money, and I had just been working in minimum wage jobs before. And when I finally got out of hospital, after a couple of months, I realized I needed to get a job again, so I went back to one of my old careers as a TV extra, which I did for a number of years. And the very first job I got was on a show called All Saints, which is Australian hospital drama. So I got out of hospital, went to the agent. They said, "Go on to All Saints." Went to wardrobe, got into a hospital gown, and went to bed. They put me in bed 9. I was patient number 9 or something. And I was on for that week, so I was on for 3 days. And every day I was lying in this in this kind of simulacrum of the experience that I just had, and very embarrassingly, once the director had to wake me for snoring because there's some long days. But I mean, I almost feel that maybe half of the book was kind of dreamed up in those 3 days, because it was just so ridiculous and so absurd. And the character. There's also surfing in this book, and there's things that that Aldo in his wheelchair does, and that also. I mean, I generally, I guess, what I do is do exaggerated versions of something. So, for me, I remember when I was in the hospital, there was a day where I had to do wheelchair skills, where, in fact, they'd been coming to me for days going, come on, it's time to learn how to use the wheelchair. And I was like, ugh, I don't want to do it. And then, I did some basic things, getting in and out of cars, that kind of thing. And then he's like, okay, now you need to go down a set of stairs. And I just was kind of terrified. It just wasn't my thing. And so, I did it eventually. But it was just, the whole thing was so terrifying. And then I was friends with a guy who just did that on the first day, and he was like, when I came out, and I was like, I finally went down the stairs, and then he showed me, like, he just like ran down the stairs, he just came down and up, and it was very easy for him. He'd been a base jumper, and he'd jumped out of a building, and his parachute hadn't opened in time. And about a year after I got out of hospital, I Googled him just to see what he was up to and trying to find him, and I saw a photo of him surfing. Lying down, and I kind of knew that I wanted to incorporate that into the book as well.
That's amazing. Can we, would you like to read anything from the hospital section of the book, which I won't say anymore?
Okay, well, yeah, the hospital section I guess that's the only strictly autobiographical element of the book. Like, there's a lot of invention in here, and I tried, because I'm not a memoirist and I don't write sort of autobiographical essays. That is not the kind of writing that I do. But I desperately wanted to include this real thing that happened to me in the book. So in the course of the writing, it just kept coming out dead. And because I generally, if I've verbally told a story to someone, I can't write it because the story's already been told. And so I think I tried for a year to write it, like second person, third person, like I just tried many different ways. And then finally I came to the conclusion that I wanted to write it as a poem, because that was the only way that I could still tell the story but include the process of discovery and the process of invention. So I'll just read like one very short. This is from the beginning of the poem. Good news, Buddha. I'm finally in the now. Absolutely worst now ever. I'm only 40 and already on my backup generator. My backpacking days are over, unless I'm the one in the pack. The best compliment I can hope to hear is vital signs are good. Everything bad in life will be worse from now on. Insomnia, diarrhea, hangovers. Every problem is the least of my problems. I used to work as an ensemble. Now I live like Trotsky died. God seized all my assets, and the door that was always open is now a wall. Even fight or flight will take time. I would totally wish this on my worst enemy. Now would be a great time to get raptured. One Daisy Duke nurse in this sea of man hands wipes me with a towel you wouldn't dry a dog with. You're scheduled for an MRI, urodynamic study and crop rotation, she says, before rushing off to deal with the oil spill in bed 7, Lot's daughter in bed 5, the squiggly thing in bed 8, the axolotl in bed 9. I catch her eye and make a check please sign in the air. She says, your stool sample has been sent to a psychic who helps police with missing persons. It feels like I've swallowed cacti. Electric eels are going to the toilet of my major organs, and I'm experiencing meteor showers. Wielding a large bore needle. Doctors, like priests, expect you to renounce your pain, she says. I vow to sit out rehabilitation. If I want to promote neuroplasticity, I'll hire a publicist. She says, a man who lives his life in pain will end up a torturer. And if you feel agony for too long, you are treated like one who hears voices. Late night, I wake in floodwaters, therapeutic time windows shutting. The spinal cord is not a ripcord, God, but I hope you landed safely. I'll just finish there.
Nice. And one of my favourite characters in the book is Morel, the Did I pronounce that correctly? Morel?
It's up to you.
Morel. He's a high school art teacher and the author of the book Artist Within, Artist Without. Both in his book and in class, he offers the budding artist creative advice of questionable quality. Like, you can be wounded by applause, but some standing ovations are lethal. And there, but for the grace of God, goes God. I don't even know what that means. But I do like this one. And when you're looking for ideas, just remember, people often die straining on the toilet. But some of the things he says feel grounded in a reality I think many creative people will understand. Like, when you begin a work, keep expectations low. Anticipate that you will be like the new groom who unexpectedly returns home from his honeymoon, a widower. And you were writing this book for 6 years, and is the book that we all read, is that the book that you started or set out to write?
It's not really at all. Like, it's funny, if you ask me, I guess, how did the book come into being? It's kind of, I have to really stretch my memory, and it's also misleading in a way, because and somewhat pointless to talk about, because if it's like if you ask me to describe a friend of mine and I tell you about the night of his conception, and I tell you, what his parents did that night, it doesn't really tell you about the friend. And in that same way, I mean, I could tell you about the 6 months that the character of Aldo was a high court judge. I could tell you about the time that it was, the whole book was actually a war novel, and they had reintroduced the draft back into Australia. That was like that for a while. It's basically, sometimes I think of it like when I went to university and I studied communications. At the end of the 3 years, I had like a single piece of paper, which was my degree. And at the end of the 3 years of writing this, I also had a single piece of paper, which was page 1. And the truth is that, like, I probably over the course of, the first 3 years, like I was at page 1 for all that time, and there's now about 87 page 1s that's in this book. They're just not at the beginning. And what I started to want to do was, there's a couple of reasons. When I finished my first book, A Fraction of the Whole, it was like 1,000 pages long. Printed it out and mailed it from Australia to the UK and to the US to try and find an agent. And it was this like big brick of a thing, and very expensive to send out. And after like 6 months of encouraging rejections, the kind of rejections you're meant to feel pleased about, because they say, congratulations, your book's amazing, but we don't want to publish it. I came to the decision that I needed to edit it down. And after having not looked at it for 6 months, it became really obvious to me that there was a character in it that didn't belong. Sometimes it's like writing is like a writer uses time, like a painter uses light, like to actually see. Otherwise, it's impossible to finish something and then look back immediately and see what's wrong with it. And so when I removed this. When I look back to edit, I removed a character, and in like almost 2 hours, I think I removed like 350 pages of the book, and that character ended up sort of becoming Aldo. So that was a kind of a beginning. And the book Quicksand, concerns itself, I think, so much with art and artists, the imagination and creation, and the search for a muse, and not just a muse, for Liam who's blocked and is trying to find something desperately to lead him to write, but the book's full of artists and creative people. Is that something you can tell us about? Yeah, I mean, I wanted to, I guess, once I had sold my first book, I sort of became a working artist, and then I met a lot of artists. I was in a relationship with a painter, and so I started to see kind of artist residencies, not the ones that I went to, but just ones I visited, and artist squats. And I kind of wanted to write about artists as personalities, because whenever artists talk about themselves, it's always in a very lofty way, and kind of self-important. And I believe that. I believe in the meaning and the power of art. But at the same time, there's some very essential thing that artists are not telling you, which is lifestyle. Like, how often does a working artist have to wake up at 5 a.m. and commute to work and put on a uniform and stack shelves and have to deal with a shitty boss, or have to deal with really annoying customers? And it's such a, when I see the people that I know who are working artists and the people I know who are not, I mean, the idea of naps. Naps is a very big thing for artists. For every artist that I know, naps is a necessary point of their days. But nobody ever admits that, and at some point it becomes a chicken egg thing. It's like, at what point did they work out that this is a possible way to live? Was it before they became an artist? Because that's a reason to do it. And so I wanted to write about those kind of people, if I consider myself as well. But and also, as I kind of said before, for me, art and philosophy and narrative, they're all one of the same thing, which is a fiction. And religion, and there's also kind of God makes an appearance, somewhere in the book. I guess because I realised also that the greatest fictional character that's ever been is God, and he's out of copyright, so anyone can use him at any time.
Well, that brings me to death, which I think death seems to be very present in this novel from the very beginning all the way through. And then I think you've set up hospital and prison as kind of the hell on earth alternatives, with death as the final destination. Could you tell us you mentioned this earlier, but the fear in the novel that's a theme, and also just death in general, is this on your mind a lot?
No, I never think of death. I don't know why, certainly there, certainly as a child, I was hospitalized as a child as well, so I have very early memories of being in hospital and being around sort of sick or dying people, and I think that definitely had an impact. I also have to say 3 words to Games of Chance, which was a short film I made at university, which was actually has very similar themes to this book. And the central idea of the book, and it's a refrain that comes over and over again, which is the idea that we live in the society that we all live in is actually a narrow bridge on which either side is the hospital society and the prison society, and at any moment any one of us could sort of slip and fall into one or the other. I mean, the hospital one is kind of obvious, but because barring a disappearing plane, we're all going to be in hospital at some point. And the prison one, I've kind of always been fascinated by the idea of inadvertent criminality, not from kind of economic or or drugs, but just, I guess, or addiction, but just the kind of thing for instance, when you are a young person and you take ridiculous risks. I remember, like anybody else, I did silly things, but at the same time I was kind of neurotic. So I had this kind of awareness of the risk and the potential, whether it was, horse riding on LSD or
so worth it,
or purchasing drugs from a strange person in India. Or you always had a friend of a friend who, someone that who was drunk and, had an accident and killed the person in their car. And so I think this kind of fascination that I've had since childhood of hospitals. And I mean, the whole book, I guess, is about fear. Aldo has this kind of an enormous amount of fears, both rational and irrational. So it's not only prison and hospital, but he has a fear of causing an avalanche by sneezing, or accidentally procreating with a half sister, or being shot in the face by a hunter. things that could happen. And my first book was about the fear of death, and this book was about the fear of life. And I fear that fear is such a big thing in every aspect of our lives, in kind of all the decisions. I think every decision we make is about fear in some way. And as a society, with kind of fear of the other races, just other people. I mean, even here in America, you have those kind of in some places they have this stand your ground laws, and that's just about legislating fear, about perceived fear. And I think, fear just runs everything, and so I feel like I'm actually writing a fear trilogy. So the next book will be about a third fear.
That's awesome. Thank you, man. And I'd love to hand over, before we finish up, if anybody's got any questions for the author, please go ahead.
Please awkwardly raise your hand.
So of the 8 to... Hi, Steve.
Hi, Sarah.
Of the 8 to 12 characters, so you have several more, at least 4 or 5 more novels in you?
Yes.
Unless you bring
put them all in one novel, maybe.
Is the next one 3, or are they always going to be pairs?
Well, I mean, I say that they're pairs, but they've actually been probably 3 or 4 in each novel so far. So the other, in this book also, when Anton was talking about the muse, I want to, when we think of the muse, we often think of muses as women. So I wanted Aldo to be the muse, and the other artists who use him as women. So in this book there's Stella and Mimi, and I think I've also split myself a little bit into them. So I think I've actually done about 9 of my people. So I only got 3 left. I've got 1 book left, then I'm out.
Anybody else?
Yep.
Steve, how do you cope with writer's block?
With writer's block. I'm blocked right now in answering your question. Well, no, I know what you should do with writer's block. It feels like I know what you should do, which is walk away. And what I do is I just kind of keep hammering until I cut through. And as I said, I'm not afraid, although maybe I should be, to go down wrong paths. So if I don't know what the right thing to do is, I'll pick something. And sometimes that's a terrible, terrible thing to do, because you can sit at your kitchen table one morning and think, and you're creating your story, and you think, well, maybe the character does this. And then 6 months later, you have compiled this thing of paper, and you've written thousands and thousands of words in 6 months, all because of that decision you made that morning. And if that was a bad decision, you've really wasted some time. I guess it's not being afraid to waste months, which and so. But at the end of every bad decision I made, there's always been something valuable. But the alternate answer to that question is Netflix. Hey.
What's your napping schedule?
Oh, that's good. That is a very important question. Well, pre-child and post-child is different. Pre-child, with several naps. No, I usually write in 2-hour blocks, and I try and squeeze as many 2-hour blocks into a day as possible. And my general, because I still write longhand, and so my general process is to spend each of those 2-hour blocks in a different location. I don't know why, but that's what I do. So, 2 hours at the beach, 2 hours in a cafe, 2 hours in a library, usually close to home, so I can come back for those all-important naps. Hey, Adrian.
I'm curious about your title. Did you, not that this is something you had to have done, but did you think about the other novel, Quicksand, the Noah Larson novel?
No, it's one of this was a fairly last minute title choice. I think that I was really like, I've got to send this manuscript out, and I don't have a title for it. And there's a couple of reasons I picked it. This has been pointed out by other people, but if you were, because the book's about fear, and if you were a child of the 70s, as we were, and you watched a lot of TV, as I certainly did, Quicksand was such an enormous part of every television show. Gilligan's Island, Bugs Bunny, Roadrunner. And so, in the catalogue of fears, ridiculous and otherwise, I thought Quicksand. That's a great fear that I remember, desperately fearing. And then, the other thing was, because the book is about struggling with those fears. It's that the idea that certainly, I don't know how real this is, but in Gilligan's Island, I learned that the more you struggle, the deeper you sink. And I had not heard of that other book. Do you know when it was written? It's like from the 30s or 40s or something. No, at some point these things, you just have to. I think there's like a statute of limitations on titles, and I think 50 years. I've not read that book. Have you read the book? Is it a great book?
It's a good book.
Okay, I'm going to read it.
All right. Well,
question, even though I've not yet read this book.
Sure.
I have it here and show it. I was scanning some reviews before I came down here. The character is a police officer, is that correct?
Yeah, one of the characters, Liam Wilder, is a police officer.
I have a question for you, because I had a funny conversation last weekend with a friend of mine, and I was saying how in my head, every day, I know it's irrational, but I think that I'd be a great homicide detective, even though I haven't done police school. But in my head, I'm like, if I could only get a chance to show how good I could be, I could really nail that job. And I feel like as somebody like Minnie who experiences a certain amount of free-floating anxiety around, just the mundane tasks of work and living, every day I'm just like, I wish I was a police officer, because then when people were like, well, it's not like it's a matter of life or death, I could be like, yes it is! I'm on the job and it does matter and it is life or death. Because sometimes even dealing with mundane details, I still feel like...
Well, I think you should definitely do that. I think that sounds like you would make a great detective, right? Without question.
But I'm just wondering, I'm just curious, because it's unusual outside of a few sort of legendary examples to have somebody in the law enforcement in a novel that's not a genre novel or things like that. So I was wondering if you feel a similar dichotomy where sometimes I'm like, I wish my job actually justified the level of anxiety I sometimes feel.
Well, in this book, what happens is the art teacher Morel gives the character Liam, who is a writer, advice, which is never have a fallback career, never acquire any kind of skill, because you'll eventually fall back on it if you want to stay true to your work and your art. And so he does that, and he spends his 20s kind of, he starts at the bottom and works his way sideways, going from minimum wage job to minimum wage job, and eventually has an idea for a novel about a policeman, and he joins the police academy for research. And then when that novel fails, he realizes that he's inadvertently gotten the qualifications of a police officer, and so just basically that's how he's accidentally becomes a police officer. So it's a total accident, and he's not really good at it and doesn't enjoy it. So.
Please thank Steve Toltz.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget you can listen to this and all our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.